Hi, we're talking today with Terry Miles from the West Corporation. Terry is in charge of their large-scale transformation at West, and it's extremely complex and many moving parts. So, Terry, I'll just start off right at the top. Like, what the heck is going on at West, and what are you guys doing?
Absolutely, Tony. Thanks for the time today. Welcome everyone to this episode. What we're trying to do at West is bring a bunch of workloads onto PCF, Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Either it's Pivotal Application Services, Elastic Runtime Environment, the main venue in which you would migrate your workloads to the cloud, and then also Pivotal Container Services. We're customers of both, and we are trying to take most of our portfolio, which would render as about 800 plus application assets. If you looked at an enterprise architects database, really it's about 200 or so customer-facing products that we're trying to take online in the course of about a 2 to 3 year schedule.
That's great. That's very ambitious. So, to highlight for our listeners, 200 applications. I'm sorry, what was the schedule on that? 2 years?
About 2 to 3 years in total when you think absolute start to absolute finish.
Great. Time doing these kind of transitions is one of the big challenges for our companies. How did you get 2 years, 3 years to be able to move 200 applications?
A business case that was explicit in phase one and less explicit in phase two. What I mean to say is the business case to justify the initial investment is exclusively about efficiency, turning down assets primarily, decommissioning assets. But there's also the strongly implicit and partially explicit motivation to lead the business case towards productivity, more rapid creation of value for customers, more rapid release cycles. And so inexorably, the application transformation project that this is, this big, massive replatforming effort, inevitably becomes a CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, a DevOps journey. You can't have one conversation without the others.
Yeah. I'll add in for anyone listening that if you're not committed to CI, don't even start.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. A large-scale transformation like that, at the heart of it is always I just call it the transformation executive. There is someone who is you're almost like the pitch perfect version of a transformation executive, because I imagine one of the things that you have to do is to continually pitch, not just to the teams that might change, but to executives in the organization about why they would support the change.
I would agree, and I think I probably fit the description of a transformation executive because I'm not an executive at all. I work for one, and I think my role is specifically to try to think like an executive, but able to engage at more tactical and lower levels of detail with application teams, to go bottom up in addition to top down.
Yeah, I regard that as kind of the inside out executive.
Yeah.
Most executives are very concerned with the running of their company. What are my peer executives thinking? What is the board thinking? What are the million things that distract from my attention from knowing what's going on at the ground level? And I do believe executives have to hire someone like you, someone like me. That's the main part of my job. Let's go sit with the team.
I would agree. The concepts of leadership and just generic definition of leadership, there's many different ways to have this conversation, but you're pressed for time. You have a lot of accountability as an executive. So you try to stay true to certain precepts, tenets, and core values that you try to transmit into your organization. Pick your method from there. But there's that concept plus also the concept of ambiguity, where your accountability doesn't align with your control. And right. So you can't coerce these people to make the changes you need to be successful. You need to persuade them somehow.
That's right. If memos did it, the whole world would run perfectly, right? That's my favorite thing is like, oh, we'll just tell them. Like, no, it's not going to work like that. Okay, well, in talking, your background in educational design, like I mentioned, it took a couple sessions thinking about what education design could really do, because I had never seen it done well, but I'm watching what you're doing and it's amazing. So give us a little background on education design and how you use it for doing transformation work.
Sure, I've been fortunate to have 10 or 20 years at the earlier part of my career to work into it. Instructional design is learning how to teach people stuff that you don't know personally. That's your job.
Huh.
You're taking in content, domain knowledge, structures that are foreign to you as a designer, but your skill is about understanding how human beings learn. And to understand how human beings learn eventually becomes a discussion on how human beings engage. And again, a lot of different theories for that, but I tend to stick with anyone who's been in education, this is a 50-year-old theory, the universal design for learning. And you can find a lot of good literature on that, but I would just pick that out of the hat and say that universal design for learning defines engagement as interest, relevancy, and control.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to have some impact on it as a person. You need to think that it matters, and you need to think the fact that you know that it matters to your career and your surroundings around you. So that's where that inside out executive thing, I think, is able to leverage the instructional design skills I was able to learn, because I'm constantly assuming I don't know the answers. It's my job to find them with didactics and engagement. And that's the core of the skill, I think.
Do you have a standout story or even a persona that you see works most frequently?
A couple of different ones quickly. I would say one, there's the persona of the coerced. And
this is okay. I'll stop, but yes,
sure.
Recognize that.
And let's take a positive spin on it. I can think of someone who is among our more successful early adopters of Pivotal at West, and this person leads a team, a platform that has been historically unstable and gone through very high numbers of incidents. They have a lot of heroes. They have a lot of Dougs. If you've read your Phoenix Project, they have plenty of those people. They're great on roller skates, but they're bad on their feet.
Yeah.
And so this man, by the time the re-platforming effort had begun in the context of PCF, there had already been a kind of cloud and procedural transformation. And this person was under what amounts to probation, that he and his dev team were already sort of forced to work more concretely, more elaborately, more concurrently with the ops teams on the other side. So even before DevOps became a formal priority, they were there, but they were looking for answers on how to proceed, that the extrinsic and intrinsic motivations were already there. So I'd say that would be the coerced, that it might be the answers they're looking for and the unblockers, the things that are out of their control that they need done.
Yeah.
That's a relatively easy conversation with them, motivations there. I'm just a person trying to get them their answers, their resources, and whatever their issues are unblocked to get them on the way.
Yeah. So this man, if I had known you were going to say coercion, I would have said ourselves that differently. But so this is what I typically find, and it's not just one. I know West was acquired by private equity, and so my assumption is that over West's, how old is it at this point?
West as a company dates back to the 80s, multiple recent acquisitions. I'd say their modern history really begins about 15 years ago.
Okay,
as
great.
more of a software enterprise.
And so can you do a little archaeology? How much coercion has been done in what you would call the modern West era?
Historically, very little. That we were, until very recently, explicitly a holding company. We would acquire and we let them sit where they lie. We had centralized IT operations to a point, but not really, mostly for our major flagship products and a series of smaller acquisitions sort of left to the side. But the recent acquisition by a private equity partner, and before that, a period of time that predates it back to about another 3 to 5 years, there has been more of a desire to turn this into a software company or a more operational company, thus the need to bring forth some sort of platform consolidation. Pivotal is the most ambitious effort in this regard and all of the satellite projects around it, but it's not the first one. Okay.
Well, great. Now, so this takes us right to where I think we want to go, which is, you said the transformation executive is it's an inside-out executive. And so I think you and anyone else who does this role needs significant air cover. So we've had conversations that Thomas Escuelo is, you have a strong and long relationship with him, and most people are not going to be able to call on that. So, why don't you tell us how you established working with Tom and what it's like? And then if you had to go select another role like this, how would you interview your potential employer? That's I think the right way to think about it.
Sure. I think it all comes back to those two concepts I mentioned earlier, an awareness of leadership, the mechanic of leadership, and not just a tolerance of ambiguity, but an attraction to it.
An embrace. Well,
yes.
Okay. I'm gonna try to hold your feet to the fire. How in the world would you know if someone you're interviewing with has any idea about leadership?
I guess it's a foxhole moment. And the way I'd go back to the story with Thomas is our initial interactions were relatively modest in scope, but full of that ambiguity, built around an assumption that we were to engage on a project together to try to find an answer where we didn't even know what the questions were to ask yet. We had business outcomes, we had cost savings or revenue growth in mind, but to get there was such a bank shot. It involved much more difficult reforms than we ever would have imagined. And so that journey together and his understanding that I was attracted to the ambiguity and used it as my motivation to keep finding the next question to ask, that's probably the skill that makes me most useful in this role.
Yeah, that's the Briar Rabbit, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Just like, in operations, you find that. You find, someone who used to be a hero that, as Napoleon says, move toward the sounds of the cannons. There are those people, but there's a maturity level you can reach for that, where the cannons stop driving your thinking and, everything else. Sorry for that stream.
And another tactical thing, and I think Brer Rabbit wouldn't use this corporate speak, but I think this message would jive. Can you take your individual accountability and express it in terms that would never make people think you're expressing your own individual accountability?
Yeah.
Can you discuss what you have to do in terms of team commitment, team responsibility, their motivation, internal marketing, I suppose? Can you just apply empathy again and again and again?
Yeah, that is great. I look at that. So from a transformation executive, the tightest way that I know how to say it is, can you constantly engage in increasing yours and everyone else's capacity?
Yeah.
And once you get that as your North Star, all challenges just become that question. Like, this team will only release on Sunday. Like, okay. Right? How can we increase their capacity? Maybe they never stop releasing on Sunday. The goal is not to get them to stop releasing on Sunday. The goal is to give them tons of optionality to release any day they want. And if they choose Sunday, fantastic.
But it all fits, doesn't it? Because that's a tenet of leadership, save us money somehow, and then a facet of ambiguity, which is, okay, but if we could just avoid the Sunday afternoon releases, for example, we're going to be fine. And I think it's that job of the inside-out executive to connect that structure of ambiguity to that structure of the tenets. It's not hard. It just takes a lot of work and listening and a fair amount of talking too.
Yeah. Now, and so that let's go back to the question that we had at the top. 2 to 3 year journey. Okay, well, that's what you promised the organization.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an executive who's bought in for that, you're sunk, right? I mean, it's just never going to get off the ground. Now, when you show up to a team, the team that always releases on Sunday, for instance, what's your timeline for them? And when do you start seeing dopamine hits? That's the real...
Sure. Engaging with the team so far at West, I would say that there's an initial discovery design phase before the transformation effort actually begins. And we try to get in touch with them about 2 to 3 months before we would actually expect them to begin doing something. And then there's a more intensive lead up to a dojo or some other sort of self-enabled interaction to be able to get an application team to actually migrate the workload to a dev and test foundation and then a stage and prod foundation. From the end of that dojo or whatever that intensive initial engagement is, to a stage prod deployment and a customer cutover date depends widely in terms of the amount of client engagement, sales team, business interaction that's needed to have involved with that release cycle.
Sure,
but
sure.
I would say end to end, we're probably looking at about 6 months, but the first 2 or 3 months are relatively passive, design oriented. And then there's a 2 to 3 month intensive engagement, and then some sort of holding pattern or quick shoot through to your go live.
Okay. And then, so we get through that 6-month pattern. So let's talk a little bit about your intuitions here. If you have to do this, how many teams have you done this with at West?
Discrete application teams are in the 60s. The products they represent are up around 100. And by now, one of the better things is that we've talked to human beings that represent virtually every team in the schedule all the way through into 2020. We've almost run out of, we're not out of new people, but we have reps on each team that have worked with us before by now.
Okay, you just dropped this little nugget, reps. How do you use reps, or what does that mean?
Sure, it could be a software engineering manager who might be the point person for the design. That person might not actually be making the design choices. There's often a solution architect nearby. The tech lead may or may not be the same person, but so it tends to start with dev managers that might represent multiple teams, but also, and we've been very fortunate in this regard, developers or operators that have been working on this one specific application somehow get reassigned to another team that we meet 6 months later. So that's been handy too. We've seen a few of those. Yeah.
We call that the grass plugs model. You know, in any 60 is that's an amazing backlog to have worked through. We love the grass plugs model, and you've got a lot now. So the lawn is just growing together. That's how we see it happen.
You know, another good metric too, just our instant message chat, like the main platform that we use internally. I like to keep track of how many people have joined it and how active those people are. Right. And we're sitting at about 350 people, and those people are hitting it every day. I bet you 100 of them have put some sort of message into that channel in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So get a good rowdy platform, because since we were a holding company and nobody was paying attention to one another for years and years, right, putting it all on the same stage where even if you take some lumps for it as a platform team where somebody makes a complaint with 300 some odd people watching, it's awesome for this program. It holds the whole effort together, that channel.
Okay, well we're going to save that one for another time. So tactics and strategy using instant messenger around this, because that's something I'm weak on, and I'm so old school that it's very hard for me to track chat, and I'm all over the place. So I'm on 50 channels. I would love to do a whole topic on how do you effectively do that. Okay, well, since we have, look, with 60 teams, 100 applications, you also have a sense of failure rate and failure location. So where are you failing? How do you get back on track? And what do you do with total fails? Okay,
program-wide, broadest set of failures were related to the fact that we limited our app migration re-platforming project to the app layer and PCF. We don't have application databases sitting inside PCF. They're supposed to sit somewhere else. Right. And that was architecturally prudent, but tactically a mistake, because we didn't have the data layer conversation to the level that we should have had it. And so it ended up holding the app layer hostage in a series of app transformation discussions. Okay. How to equip your database teams to take databases to the public cloud, for example. So that whole ecosystem stuff, that was the big failure.
Okay, and did you come up with any workaround for that? You got any Any tips for doing that?
Yes, and it's not a new it's not a lightning bolt at all, but it leads to the best truth I'd say about our project. We just apply good old fashioned project management and cajoling and bird dogging, kept asking the questions of why something wasn't available, finally got in touch with the teams who we realized it wasn't that they didn't want this project to succeed, it's that they weren't upskilled to be able to get this project to succeed. And we realized in the end, people that had no allegiance to the executives that own our project were going to stop this project if they weren't prepared a certain way. And so once we got to those people, started working with them, created the opportunities, the vendor relationships they needed, that really started to solve things for us. But what it also did is, and the real ultimate truth of this project is, we had a plan. We have a group of some applications to be able to move over, but it's not like West Corporation hasn't stopped buying stuff along the way. It's not like other consolidation efforts haven't been happening outside of our view.
Right.
So we can point to a lot of large applications that were never planning to come to PCF. They are coming to PCF now because they see the program structure. So it's not just the platform, but it's the program of support around the platform that became attractive. We're engaged, so they want to engage too. And that has been oxygen to the initial planned project itself, because good months, bad months, where we're on target with our app migration counts and where we're not, we can always look to the rest of the business and say, we are attractive, aren't we? We are selling the concept of transformation. So it's always been useful to just engage and push the program along. And don't think so myopically about the app that you're working on today or the platform that you're trying to get to go live today. It's about the broader business.
Yeah, man, that is what we see that we want most of our customers to do. Man, there's so much in that one. Let's back up a little bit to, I call it adjacent executives. Mm-hmm. And so when we look at leadership at the team level, there is only one direction to look, and that is up. You trust that your executive that you work for is properly interpreting the company's desires and goals. Mm-hmm. And if someone comes in from the side, you know, that you just discard that. You're like, hey, what you're doing sounds amazing, but my full week is blocked up supporting what my management chain seems to think is important, and I don't have any room for yours. Okay, so how do you do that preparation? You just said we would come to a team, the data layer team, they got no buy-in, their executive's not pushing it. How do you start that process?
Find out what their day-to-day jobs are about, the things that are blocking them, see if you can do them a favor. Yeah. And if you talk about it that way, they'll give you a lot more information, because if they're in owning the blocker mode, they're going to give you it's almost like FDA reporting when there's an accident on the production floor. You're going to tell the government as little as possible. That's the paradigm. And if you're the one in blame, you're not going to share. So if you get them to talk about what they want from other teams, you get a lot more information, and then you try to attack it that way. And that's the same conversation. This would all be real predictable. Any company that's got to do this replatforming effort, if you haven't already had your networking conversation, your security conversation, or your data layer conversation, you're going to have it. You're going to have it hard, or you're going to have it easy, but you're going to have it. And how you engage with those teams and do them favors, help them unblock their things, is going to have them saying nice things about your project to their executives. And that's the way you do your executive sponsor a favor.
Man, I love it. That's a charm offensive.
Absolutely. This is internal marketing. PCF is a project. It's a platform. It's a technology, but that is a narrow definition of it. It is an enormous program reform. You can't adopt platform as a service without making massive changes to your technology and your teams and your processes. And so assume that your success or failure is not going to rely even primarily on the success of Pivotal as a technology. It's more about the success of the program of adoption and value creation around Pivotal. And ops people have value too. Devs have value too, not just customers.
Yeah. let me back up and give a little more context. Part of the reason that Terry and I are talking today is because he runs the internal podcast that I listened to and heard some of his devs just be so clear about transformation. Like, well, you can adopt all these fast technologies, but if you won't change everything else around it, it doesn't make any sense. And so, yeah, wow. Okay, let's have this as the last question because I think I could probably talk to you forever. An internal, how did you sell a large scale internal marketing concept, or did you just do it? Let me hear about this internal marketing thing and how you view it.
Probably would have ended up there explicitly anyway, but I'll go back to my boss, Thomas Squayo, who, when he gave me this job, the way he put it was, Terry, your job is to be what this company isn't. And your job is to find batons to build those batons, then pass those batons, and then go back and find another baton to build and do it again. And so it's spackle, it's polyfill that you're supposed to be. And in that frame of mind, you can't help but see yourself as a program and process to sell, to evangelize.
Yeah.
And you can do it different ways. If the more technical the audience is, you turn it into a tool conversation because everybody loves the new thingy, and
Yes.
you can start talking about it that way. But if it's a team that's a little bit technologically less inclined, if it's more of a tech business conversation, it's more the procedural aspects of reform, that replatforming changes almost everything. And
Yeah.
so just figure out the change they're most concerned with and talk to them about it. That becomes advocacy and evangelism, just doing that.
Yeah. Okay. And so if we were doing this somewhere and we did not see an explicit commitment to long-term advocacy and evangelism, okay, let's just pretend that I've got a customer who is in that situation. They do, at some level, they want to change, but they don't have that. If you came in cold, how would you sell them on that?
It could be, at its most narrow, myopic view, give me a ticket number, a JIRA issue number, or some sort of ITSM ticket number that is bedeviling you. Let's start there, and let's bring the camera in all the way. But more productively, I'm just trying to figure out the reason. That initial call that they're on with me, did they call it? Now I want to figure out why that meeting exists. If they are reluctantly being dragged into that meeting, figure out the conversation they wish they were having. And that could even be a back channel conversation with someone on an IM channel while you're all sitting there on a phone call.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be in front of everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. That is
in fact, the walk back is a really good way to do the evangelism. Do that frustrating conversation where everybody and their manager's online, that 35-person call where only 2 people talk and everyone listens with dread. Yep. Do that one, and then reach out to other people on that call back channel afterwards and try to get it rolling.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, one of the precepts we use for this kind of work is, if you have 30 people, 3 of them want to change for no reason. They will be your friendliest audience. So start there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to leave the last thing to you. Is there any advice, things that you wish you knew when you started, things that you would tell let's talk about a new graduate. Imagine a new graduate got really excited about doing this kind of thing. What would you say to them about doing their first project inside a company?
You know what's going to happen is they're going to come equipped with different devices that they learned in school or read about, of how to solve problems, how to deduce what the cause of a problem might be, the concepts of standardized work, of a culture of automation. There's going to be all sorts of different intellectual handles these people are going to have to get into it. Trust those handles, but know that people don't care about your taxonomy. So use what you've been given, but keep trying to ask questions a lot more often than answer them. If you're in meetings early on, even when you think you know the answer, don't talk for about 5 seconds and see if somebody rushes in, because you're going to get a good take on an answer that might be very similar to yours. What you're looking to do is that new drop-in is learn the taxonomy of how people express their motivations and anxieties. And that's really what you're looking to do, is understand that if you're trying to make change happen, there's a lot of Rosetta Stone building to be done. And you've got to keep your aperture open. You've got to keep asking the questions. The language will come to you. You're smart enough to get into that chair. And so trust what you know, but you got to do a lot of listening. And that often means a lot of talking and question asking and poking to get them to tell you more.
Fantastic advice. Terry Miles of the West Corporation. What's your actual title there?
They call our team the team of portfolio delivery, because we do stuff like this. And it's not even exclusively pivotal, right? It could be artificial intelligence, machine learning stuff. They're all cartridges. The process is the same: enable, motivate, track, gauge, instrument, and just make it happen and make sure people can see it when it does.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for being part of the Pivotal family. We love this kind of work, and we love seeing people do it.
Tony, it's a pleasure. You guys are a great team. Full stack service support. We really appreciate you guys and what you do.
Anytime. All right. Well, that was our conversation with Terry Miles of West Corporation. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.